So I'm going to talk about some other bands and their influence based off from what I could see from my perspective, my experience, my opinions. Okay. It's just kind of like more of like a historical view from my experience. But seeing the bands, playing with shows with the bands, hearing the recordings, and seeing them live and the response live, things like that. Okay, so bands. Okay, we'll talk about Malfunkshun first. I've already talked about Malfunkshun before. Now, Malfunkshun is one of those bands that I think I saw like 3 times early on, and then by about 1987, I saw them one more time at the Crescent, and they were a little bit. Yeah, I would say they were more interesting at that point. Anyway, early on, Malfunkshun was one of those bands that you'd go see a show, so there'd be some punk rock show at Guerrilla Gardens, and Malfunkshun would be on the bill. I mean, this is the same with like, Green River, Skin Yard, the Melvins, all these bands, Noxious Fumes. We were all bands that opened shows back then, and not many, like in 84, 85, the headliners were usually from out of town. So there's a whole lot of like smaller opening bands. Anyway, Malfunkshun would clear the room. I mean, they literally, like, you'd have like a group of, just a few people watching, and I'd stand and watch like maybe 2 songs because he was pretty entertaining. He would paint his face and wear like pretty much what he wore in you know well, you can see pictures of Malfunkshun at that time. So he was a real entertainer and theatrical in a sense. And he had one of those basses like nobody else had ever. I've never seen anybody play a bass like that, but it had no headstock. It was like one of those basses that didn't have a headstock. It was just a weird looking bass, and they were always very out of tune. Like Malfunkshun was heavy in a sense, but it was a mess. It didn't really make sense, and because of that, people didn't care. I mean, they would leave. So this is the times that I saw them at the Guerrilla Gardens. Malfunkshun, their recordings. So at one point when Deep Six came out, now the Deep Six compilation is essential for anybody that wants to like know anything about the Seattle scene and the grunge sound and the beginning. You have to listen to the record called Deep Six. It has Melvins, Green River, Malfunkshun, U-Men, Skin Yard, and I think I'm missing somebody. I'm probably missing somebody. I can't remember. Anyway, that was really the first record. I think before any of those bands released an album on Sub Pop. That was released on CZ. It was maybe around the same time, something like that. So you listen to Malfunkshun recorded, and you're like, wow. I mean, I actually like their recordings. I think they're killer. But live, being experienced live, I mean, the heavy sound that you get on record that was not coming across live at all. I mean, it was a mess live. In between songs, Landrew would talk to the crowd like there's a room full of 50,000 people, though. I mean, he would be like, "Yo, you know what the fuck was that? I was like, what? He'd be like talking like like a rock star, you know? I mean, like, I always imagined it was like Ted Nugent or something, you know? He was like talking to a fucking crowd full of people, you know? So that was always entertaining. I remember, you know, like watching that, thinking that that was pretty entertaining. But of course, never imagining that you know they would be part of, um, in a sense, like the beginning of what you would hear as the Seattle scene. Never would have imagined that for sure. Now, Green River back then, it was kind of the same thing. Okay, so the first time Noxious Fumes played with Green River, probably about their first show. I think it was probably their first or second show, and this is a fact. And it was in Olympia, and their guitars were in tune, and that show is recorded. I actually posted that show on my YouTube, and it's a long story on how I had acquired that recording. But anyway, they released it with the flyer from that show last year. And if you want to hear that, it's Green River live at the Tropicana. So that recording, that was killer. Like, remember the Kiss cover, Strange Ways, and they had, you know, they were pretty an interesting band. Their guitars were in tune. They were holding it down. I mean, I can't say that I was blown away by what they were doing, but they were good. Now in Seattle, Green River, when I saw them play, they were, you know, again, it's like for me, if a band's out of tune, it ruins it for me, you know. So they were more a mess, you know. Like, I like the songs, but again, live, the next like 2 or 3 times I saw them, it's like live they just didn't do it for me, you know. Um, I think that both of the albums they released, in my opinion, are all right, you know. But I don't know. I mean, I remember there was a point when, you know, I was really like obsessed with Nirvana, you know, by the end of 1988. Like, I mean, you know, everything Kurt was giving me was just like, I remember, you know, so you had these other bands releasing records before Nirvana, and I'm just like, man, you know, this is so baffling. Like, even Kurt's like talking about Green River, you know, like he really likes Green River. I'm always like, I'm just not that blown away by him. And I'm thinking, man, Nirvana is far like a more interesting, heavier band than, you know, Green River and Mudhoney even, you know. Mudhoney live was fucking intense. They were a damn good live band, you know. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they still are, but you know, back then it was they were pretty chaotic and kicked your ass. If you see them today, it's more, you know, it's not going to come across as like they did in 1989, you know. But there's videos of them playing in 1989, and if you watch that, that's you can get a little bit of an idea. I think there's one. Watch the video of them playing live at the Underground in Seattle. I think that's online, and that's like, you know, I mean, yeah, they were damn good. And you know, Mudhoney was very influential because they were different and they were a great live band. On the records, you know, I think there were certain songs that stuck out, like "Touch Me, I'm Sick," and a couple other songs. But the record, listening to Mudhoney record for me is kind of like, you know, you hear the first couple songs and the rest just kind of sounds, you know, it's kind of the same song for me as it went on. It didn't really like, you know. But live, great band. Tad. So Tad, when they first moved to the Northwest, they opened a couple different shows that Subvert played at Natasha's Pavilion, and somewhere else too. We played two shows with Tad. Well, Tad opened for the show, so they actually opened for us. And I remember like being interested in what they were doing. It was like it was heavy, it was different, it was interesting, you know, but it was also like, what the fuck, these guys, man, what's up with these guys? They got picked up by Sub Pop pretty quick, so about the same exact time that Bleach recorded, or Nirvana recorded Bleach recorded Nirvana. Yeah, there we go. Tad recorded God's Balls, almost about the exact same time. So those albums came out. So Tad had moved from, I think, Idaho. I'm pretty sure. So they were very influential, as very heavy, you know, as like, you know, I don't know Tad's influences, if he was initially influenced by other bands happening in the Northwest, and they decided to move to the Northwest, you know. I'm sure he was like, he has like tons of metal influences, and, you know, I don't really know. I don't really know the story of the initial, you know, Tad, why they moved to the Northwest. I think it'd be interesting to find out. I've talked to Tad many times, but not like about, you know, about why they moved to Seattle. Played lots of shows with Tad and with Tad's bands that he had, like later on, like Hog Molly. When I was in Load Levelers, we played a few shows with Hog Molly. There's another band that Tad had played a show with. I don't remember the name of it. Anyway, see, Malfunction, Green River, Tad, Mudhoney. You know, all of those bands being initially influential. Okay, they were more influential by like 90, you know. I had friends that loved Green River and Mudhoney, you know, but I was kind of like, you know, I'm way into Nirvana and the Melvins. So you kind of had that thing, but you know, so you have different people, you know, and that friend I was in a band with, you know, also was very influenced by Red Cross, you know. So you have the people that are, you know, more into that side, Red Cross, Stooges, Green River, Mudhoney, kind of thing, you know. And then you have the Sabbath, Melvins, Nirvana, Jesus Lizard, like the punk, more of like heavier punk rock. So you have a lot of, and you have the early metal influences. So, I mean, at the same time, you know, Subvert is considered to be influential in the punk rock scene, you know, as like Subvert, The Accused, Poison Idea in Portland, you know, and like other punk bands around at that time. But there were not very many like really fucking like insanely intense punk bands at that time. There were a few, and there were a lot of punk bands, But you know, we were definitely. I think that Subvert was influential as being like an early. We were kind of influential in the crossover punk metal, but also the anarcho, you know, we were like one of the early bands that were in the realm of like Neurosis, Christ on Parade, um, Conflict, you know, where there's the political punk bands, but yet we were like speed metal punk, you know. And again, we were like live. I think anybody that would have seen Subvert, and I remember hearing this, like live, we were insane. Like it was like an onslaught, an onslaught. But the recordings were always kind of like good, you know, but like not like, you know, you listen to a Subvert recording and you're blown away. But I think that's one of the things, like, you know, that is maybe missing today. That the experience of seeing like really great local live bands that just fucking kick your ass and blow your mind doesn't happen to me. You know, I see good bands live, but I don't see bands like these to kick my ass like back then. I mean, you know, a lot of bands, you know, a lot of bands you'd see. So that's a really important thing. All the bands I'm talking about. Part of the influence was the live show. You know, if your band put on a good fucking live show, you know, like song quality, your live performance, that was more influential than your recording, you know. So that's one thing that made Nirvana really fucking good. Like no matter what anybody says, you know, like you know, I've read things, oh, they were horrible when they began. You know what? No. You know, Nirvana was far past most local bands at that time that you'd go and see. I mean, they were, you know, Kurt's voice was always good, always fucking good, you know. There's no doubt about that. You know, I experienced walking in a room and not knowing who Skid Row was and hearing Kurt singing and playing and being like, holy shit, you know, and having to sit down and listen. I mean, that is a fact. Like, wow. Yeah. Yeah. Green River, you know, Tad, all those bands, like, no, they didn't do that, you know. It was more like, oh, you know, you weren't like initially just blown away and had to sit down. I had to do that when I saw Skid Row, you know. I was like, wow. Like, you know, I mean, sitting in the, you know, theater seat, you know, like listening and watching the band being like kind of mesmerized, you know, really. So, you know, then you have a band like the U-Men, you know, I mean, fuck, man. The first couple U-Men EPs are fucking killer. No doubt about it. You know, I mean, that's another band, and they were actually influential on for the first wave of all the bands I was just talking about, or whatever. You know, like so they were before Malfunkshun, before you know Green River, before the Melvins, or you know like playing when those bands were thinking about getting together. You know, like those people were at the shows that the U-Men would open. You know, I went to some of those shows, and the U-Men were. I don't know if they were as influential musically, but they were such a unique, like, cool band, man. They were like such a unique band to watch live. I mean, it really was. It was kind of theatrical, and it was just interesting. Like you'd never heard anything like it, you know. Um, you know, but still,